Beneath the restless waves of the Aegean Sea, in the year 1900, a group of sponge divers stumbled onto something they never expected. Their boat had drifted close to the island of Antikythera, a place with steep cliffs, little vegetation, and almost no reason for anyone to stop. Yet a storm forced them near its coast, and while searching the seabed, they encountered a wreck, an ancient ship resting silently in the depths. At first, it was the treasures that caught their eyes. Bronze statues half buried in sand, marble torsos broken by centuries of seawater, amphorae still intact despite the weight of time. But among these relics was something far less impressive to the untrained eye. A lump of corroded bronze, fused together with stone, green with decay. It didn't look like treasure. It looked like scrap. The divers brought it up anyway, perhaps out of curiosity, perhaps out of duty. No one then could have imagined that this misshapen fragment would become one of the most puzzling discoveries in human history. A discovery that even today raises questions we cannot fully answer. How could something so advanced, so impossibly intricate, exist more than 2,000 years ago? Was it really what some would later call the world's first computer? Or is there something deeper hidden within this artifact? Something we have yet to grasp. The object waited quietly, neglected at first, stored in boxes at the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. For months, even years, it was overlooked. But like all great mysteries, it refused to remain silent. The corroded bronze would one day be cracked open, and the world would realize it was looking at gears that should not have existed in the ancient world. And so begins the story of the Antikythera Mechanism. When the fragments were first examined, scholars had little interest. The statues were magnificent, the jewels intriguing, but the corroded bronze looked unimpressive. Years passed before anyone paid it serious attention. Then, in 1902, a young archaeologist named Valerios Stais noticed something unusual as he handled the strange object. Hidden within the corrosion, he saw what looked like a gear, an intricate, precisely cut gear, unlike anything ever found in artifacts from the ancient world. The teeth were evenly spaced, the mechanism deliberate, and it suggested movement. Stais tried to argue that this was some sort of device, not just a random piece of metal. But in his time, the idea was almost unthinkable. How could the ancients have built something so complex? His colleagues dismissed him, believing it was a mistake, perhaps part of a clock that had somehow been mixed into the wreck in later centuries. But the wreck was no medieval ship. It dated back to around 70–60 BCE, and no known clocks existed from that era. The fragment was set aside again, but the questions lingered. How could such precision exist in the ancient world? Could it have been an astronomical instrument, a navigation device, or something even more remarkable? Decades passed. Wars came and went. The fragments remained, quietly waiting in museum storage. And then, slowly, as new techniques emerged in the 20th century, scholars returned to it. X-rays revealed that inside the corroded lumps were dozens of tiny gears, interlocking with astonishing precision. The fragments weren't random. They were part of a system, an arrangement so carefully designed it could rival modern machinery. The more they looked, the stranger it became. The Antikythera Mechanism, as it came to be called, appeared to predict astronomical events, solar eclipses, lunar cycles, planetary movements. It was not just an artifact. It was a window into a lost knowledge, a technology far ahead of its time. But how was this possible? Who built it? And why did no other examples survive? If this device truly existed in the ancient world, Shouldn't there be others like it? Blueprints, copies, descendants of its design? Instead, there was silence. One device alone, as if it had appeared out of nowhere and then vanished with the ship that carried it. The mystery deepened with every discovery. Scientists debated, historians speculated, and engineers tried to reconstruct it. But one question kept circling back, refusing to go away. If the Antikythera mechanism could track the heavens so precisely, what else might its makers have been capable of? The fragments of the mechanism did not reveal their secrets easily. For centuries, the bronze gears had been fused by salt and time, locked together in a kind of stony shell. But by the middle of the 20th century, new technologies made it possible to peer inside without destroying them. When radiographs were first taken, scholars saw something extraordinary. Tiny, delicate gear teeth, cut so precisely that they meshed together like the workings of a modern clock. Only this was no medieval timepiece. This was at least 2,000 years old, from an age when the Romans were still laying roads and the Greek world was still recovering from centuries of conflict. How could anyone in that time have possessed such mechanical skill? Some skeptics argued that the X-ray images were misleading, that the fragments had been misinterpreted. Yet as the scans improved, it became undeniable. Inside the corroded mass lay a network of more than 30 interlocking gears. Engineers who studied it were stunned. The level of precision in cutting the gears implied tools and knowledge far beyond what the ancient world was believed to possess. Even the Romans, with all their engineering brilliance, had never produced anything comparable. And yet, here it was, clear, undeniable evidence of a technology that should not have existed. The device seemed to work as a kind of astronomical calculator. By turning a small handle, the gears would rotate, translating motion into prediction. On the front dial, tiny pointers traced the paths of the sun and moon across the zodiac. On the back, spirals tracked lunar cycles and eclipses, and there were hints of even more, the possible movements of the known planets, recorded centuries before mechanical astronomy was supposed to exist. But if this was true, it meant the Greeks, or perhaps someone else, had created a machine capable of simulating the heavens, a kind of analog computer, long before the word computer was ever spoken. The implications were staggering. If the ancients had this kind of knowledge, why did history not record it? Why was there no mention of such machines in the surviving works of historians? No blueprints, no copies left behind. Was this a one-of-a-kind creation, a marvel made by some lost genius? Or was it simply the only survivor of a technology that once flourished, only to vanish in the tides of history? Some pointed to the writings of Cicero, the Roman philosopher, who mentioned that the great Greek inventor Archimedes had built devices capable of displaying the movements of the heavens. Could the Antikythera mechanism have been part of this tradition, a descendant of designs long since lost? Or was it something even older, reaching back to a knowledge that had slipped through the cracks of time? Every answer only deepened the mystery. The device could not be dismissed as coincidence. The engravings on its plates, though worn, showed inscriptions. Greek letters describing astronomical cycles, numbers, even references to eclipses. This was no toy. It was a tool of extraordinary sophistication, a machine that embodied both science and philosophy, calculation and wonder. And yet, one could not ignore the shipwreck in which it was found. Why had such a priceless device been aboard? Was it being transported as treasure? Was it the possession of a wealthy scholar, a philosopher, perhaps even a king? Some wondered if it had been intended as a gift, its destination lost to history when the sea claimed the ship. Others whispered that perhaps it was never meant to be seen, that its presence in the wreck was the reason we found it at all. Still, the larger question remained unanswered. How did the ancient Greeks, or whoever built it, gain the knowledge to construct such a thing? Was it purely the work of human genius, or does the Antikythera mechanism hint at a deeper story, one in which fragments of knowledge were passed down from sources we no longer understand? The divers who first brought up the fragments could never have guessed what they had unearthed. To them, it was just another object from the deep. But with each passing decade, that corroded bronze spoke louder, demanding attention. And with every new study, the Antikythera mechanism seemed to whisper the same unsettling truth. History is far more complex than we believe, and sometimes the past holds technologies that should not exist at all. By the late 20th century, the Antikythera mechanism had already unsettled historians. It was no longer dismissed as a curiosity. It was clear that this device, with its complex gears and engravings, represented something the ancient world was not supposed to have. But as the artifact was studied further, its mystery only deepened. When modern imaging techniques like advanced X-ray tomography were applied in the early 2000s, researchers discovered far more than they had imagined. Beneath the corrosion were not just gears, but inscriptions, thousands of tiny Greek characters etched onto the surfaces, like an instruction manual. The words were faint, worn by centuries underwater, yet still visible with the right light. These inscriptions described cycles of the moon, eclipses, and calendars. They mentioned the names of months, astronomical periods, and even hinted at connections to the Olympic Games. This was no random contraption. It was an instrument that blended science, religion, and social life, tying together the heavens with human affairs. The gears themselves told their own story. More than 30 bronze wheels had once turned together in precise harmony. By adjusting a dial, the user could simulate the passage of time, predicting when eclipses would occur, charting the position of celestial bodies. It was like holding the sky in your hands, a miniature cosmos built from bronze and genius. Yet the craftsmanship raised new questions. To cut gears so fine required tools of extraordinary precision. Some teeth were less than a millimeter long, perfectly shaped to mesh without error. How had ancient metalworkers achieved this? No other surviving Greek artifact came close in complexity. Even the great bronze statues of Athens or Rhodes, while masterpieces, did not require this level of micro-engineering. One theory was that the Antikythera mechanism was the product of a single genius, perhaps someone like Archimedes, whose legendary machines had already astonished the ancient world. Cicero had written of a device that could model the motions of the heavens, built by Archimedes himself. Could this be a surviving example? If so, it meant Archimedes had achieved a level of technological mastery that would not reappear in Europe until 1,000 years later. Others argued it must have been part of a larger tradition, a craft known to a select few but lost with time. Perhaps workshops in Rhodes or Alexandria had once built such machines, passing their secrets among scholars until wars, fires, and collapse erased them from history. If true, then the Antikythera mechanism was not a one-off miracle. It was simply the last survivor of a forgotten lineage. But what happened to that lineage? Why did the knowledge not spread? Why was it not preserved in manuscripts, drawings, or replicas? If ancient engineers could craft this, what else might they have known? What else might we have lost? The shipwreck itself added another layer of intrigue. Archaeologists discovered that it carried not just statues and pottery, but goods from across the Mediterranean. Some objects came from Rhodes, others from Asia Minor. The vessel was large, a merchant ship, and the mechanism may have been part of a wealthy cargo destined for Rome. If true, this meant the device was considered valuable, worthy of transport alongside treasures. But valuable to whom? A philosopher who needed it for astronomical teaching? A statesman seeking prestige? Or was it meant for something more practical, like navigation at sea, ensuring safe voyages by predicting the movements of the heavens? The theories multiplied. Some saw in it the hands of a lost civilization, a shadow of knowledge reaching further back than Greece, perhaps even to the Minoans or beyond. Others whispered of connections to myths of Atlantis, imagining that the mechanism was not just an isolated artifact, but a fragment of a deeper story, one in which humanity had once reached higher than we dare believe, only to fall back into darkness. And then there were the scientists who studied its design as if it were a puzzle. Step by step, gear by gear, they tried to rebuild it. Reconstructions began to appear, modern replicas showing what the mechanism might once have looked like. With polished bronze, wooden casings, and rotating dials, these reconstructions stunned viewers. Turn a crank, and the heavens came alive. The sun sliding across the zodiac, the moon waxing and waning, eclipses appearing right on schedule. It was beautiful, elegant, and humbling. Because it showed what had been lost. A machine that should have changed history, should have led to an earlier scientific revolution, instead lay forgotten in the sea for centuries. Why? Why had such brilliance vanished? Was it destroyed by war, buried by the fall of empires, erased by fire when libraries like Alexandria burned? Or had it been deliberately hidden, its knowledge guarded so tightly that when its keepers died, it disappeared with them? Every new discovery only sharpened the riddle. The Antikythera mechanism was no longer just an ancient device. It was a reminder that history is fragile, that knowledge can be gained and lost, and that sometimes the fragments left behind tell us only part of the story. And still, one question lingered, haunting both scientists and dreamers alike. If this is what survived from a single shipwreck, what else might still be waiting, buried under the seas, hidden in the earth, whispering of worlds we have forgotten? The more scholars reconstructed the Antikythera mechanism, the more uncanny it became. What at first looked like corroded fragments had transformed, through painstaking research, into something astonishing, an ancient machine that should not exist, at least not in the world we thought we knew. Each gear, each dial, each fragment carried meaning. And as these pieces were digitally scanned and digitally reassembled, a clearer picture began to form. The front dial seemed to chart the zodiac, mapping the movement of the sun across the constellations. Another dial tracked the phases of the moon with eerie precision, even accounting for the irregularities in the lunar orbit. But the most fascinating discovery lay in the backplates. There, etched into the bronze, researchers found inscriptions that acted like a guide. They were faint, nearly erased by time, but with advanced imaging, entire passages were recovered. These described cycles of eclipses, patterns of solar and lunar events stretching years into the future. The text mentioned the Saros cycle, a period of 223 lunar months, known to predict eclipses with remarkable accuracy. Whoever built this device not only understood these patterns, but had managed to encode them into a machine. It was, in a sense, a calendar of the cosmos. But more than that, it was a way to make the heavens predictable, to tame the mysteries of the sky with gears and mathematics. in an age when the gods were thought to rule the sun and the moon. Here was a device that showed their movements could be measured, anticipated, controlled. But if the Greeks, or some forgotten predecessor, were capable of such insight, why did the knowledge not ignite a revolution? Why did it not spread through the ancient world, sparking an early age of machines? Why was the next comparable gear-driven astronomical device not built until nearly 1,500 years later in medieval Europe? This silence in history is perhaps the most haunting part of the Antikythera mechanism. It is not just what it is, but what it represents. An isolated burst of brilliance, surrounded by centuries of absence. A flicker of knowledge, glowing briefly, then swallowed by darkness. When modern engineers studied the gears, they were stunned by their sophistication. The gear ratios were carefully chosen to represent astronomical cycles. Some teeth were cut with such precision that even under magnification, their alignment seemed flawless. It was as if a modern machinist had stepped into the past. And yet, according to the timeline of history, such workmanship should have been impossible. Some scientists proposed that the device was not Greek at all, but Hellenistic, a creation from Rhodes or Alexandria, where astronomy had flourished. Rhodes, in particular, was home to the great astronomer Hipparchus, who had made detailed observations of the heavens around 150 BCE. Was the mechanism based on his work? Could Hipparchus himself have designed it, encoding his astronomical discoveries into bronze? Others argued that it was linked to Archimedes, whose mechanical genius was legendary. Cicero described a device in Archimedes' possession that could display the motions of the heavens. Was the Antikythera mechanism a descendant of this tradition, preserved in secret circles, known only to a handful of scholars before vanishing into the sea? And yet, a darker possibility lingered. What if this was not an isolated invention at all? What if there had once been more machines like it, scattered across the Mediterranean world, serving scholars, priests, or navigators? If so, then their disappearance raises an unsettling question. What great library, what city, what civilization fell, taking with it this technology? The shipwreck itself gave tantalizing hints. The vessel had carried treasures, statues, fine glassware, and artifacts from across the known world. Perhaps the mechanism was among its most prized possessions, en route to Rome as a spoil of war, or to a wealthy patron as a gift. If it had arrived, would it have changed history? Would the Romans, famed for their engineering, have adopted the device, spreading its use across their empire? Or would it still have been lost, buried in the same silence that swallowed so much of ancient knowledge? As modern reconstructions came to life, turning cranks and moving dials, people could see what the ancients had seen. The sky itself, brought down to earth. A hand-turned cosmos, delicate yet powerful, making sense of the infinite. It was humbling to imagine some scholar or philosopher, more than 2 millennia ago, gazing at this mechanism and watching the heavens unfold in miniature. And yet, that image also carried a trace of melancholy, because it showed us not just what was possible, but what had been forgotten. A reminder that progress is not always a straight line, that sometimes brilliance can vanish, leaving only fragments behind. The Antikythera mechanism was no ordinary artifact. It was a voice from the past, whispering of knowledge that once existed but is no longer ours. And each time we study it, we are left with the same haunting thought. If a machine like this was possible 2,000 years ago, what else might have been created? What else might still lie undiscovered, waiting in the deep? By the early 21st century, the Antikythera mechanism was no longer dismissed as a curiosity, but embraced as one of the most extraordinary archaeological finds of all time. And yet, even with modern science, the device refused to surrender all of its secrets. Using advanced X-ray tomography and 3D imaging, researchers built the clearest picture yet of what lay inside the corroded fragments. They uncovered gear trains, intricate arrangements of interlocking wheels, designed with astonishing mathematical precision. These weren't random gears thrown together. Each ratio mirrored a celestial cycle. The moon's odd, shifting path, its eccentric orbit, had even been corrected for in the calculations. Whoever designed it understood the heavens with a sophistication almost impossible for the period. The inscriptions revealed even more. They spoke of eclipses, described the timing of games, and linked astronomical cycles to cultural events. This wasn't just science. It was philosophy, religion, and society, bound into one machine. The ancients had built not simply a calculator, but a cosmic guide. But here's where the mystery deepens. The device was far too complex to have appeared fully formed in a single moment. To create such a machine required trial and error, generations of experimentation, and a tradition of craftsmanship. Yet history shows no such tradition. No earlier prototypes, no simpler versions, no written manuals, nothing. The mechanism stands alone, like a lighthouse without a coastline. So where did it come from? One school of thought insists it was the product of a genius, perhaps a solitary mind like Archimedes or Hipparchus. But even a genius needs tools, apprentices, methods of fabrication. Where were the workshops that cut gears so fine, the artisans who polished bronze to such accuracy? Without them, the mechanism could not exist. Another theory suggests that the mechanism was not an anomaly, but evidence of a broader, now vanished, technological tradition. Imagine for a moment an ancient world where machines of this type were more common, used by astronomers, scholars, perhaps even sailors. Imagine that entire workshops built these devices, producing knowledge far ahead of their time. If so, then something catastrophic must have happened. Wars, invasions, collapses, forces that erased this knowledge so completely that only one artifact survived, hidden beneath the sea. The more scholars studied it, the more unsettling the silence around it became. It was as if history had skipped a step. We see gears in ancient Greece, then nothing for over 1,000 years, until medieval Europe slowly rediscovers the craft. What explains that gap? Did knowledge die with a few scholars when libraries burned? Was it suppressed, considered dangerous? Or was it simply forgotten, drowned in the tides of time? Modern engineers who rebuilt the mechanism by hand confessed to feeling unnerved. They were working with tools and computers, yet the ancient device matched their precision. Some replicas showed just how advanced it was. Turn a crank, and the sun and moon moved across the zodiac. The phases of the moon shifting, eclipses marked years in advance. It was not a guesswork device. It was astonishingly accurate. And yet accuracy requires not just genius, but a system. To build it, one would need precise measurements of celestial movements, recorded over centuries. One would need mathematics to calculate ratios, metallurgy to shape bronze, and artisans to cut gears that small. This meant infrastructure. Schools, observatories, workshops. Where were they? Why do they not appear in the record? The silence is almost louder than the discovery itself. Some scholars whisper that history is not a straight path, but a cycle. Civilizations rise, achieve brilliance, then fall, leaving only fragments behind. Could the Antikythera Mechanism be one such fragment? a whisper of a world that reached higher than we imagine, only to collapse into silence. Others drift further into speculation. They suggest that such knowledge might have been passed down, carried from cultures older than Greece, cultures now lost to memory. Minoans, Egyptians, Mesopotamians. Did one of them nurture a science we no longer recognize? Was the mechanism the last echo of a knowledge that never should have survived at all? And then, there are the darker possibilities. Some wonder if the device was never meant to be widespread, if its knowledge was guarded by only a few. A secret passed down like a relic, kept hidden until fate tossed it into the sea. If so, then what else might remain hidden? What other machines, books, or tools lie buried, unseen, waiting for discovery? The Antikythera Mechanism does not give answers. It asks questions, sharp ones, that cut across the assumptions of history. How much do we truly know about the past? How many stories have been lost? And what does it mean that the only reason we know of this machine is because of an accident? A storm that drove divers to an unlikely shore more than a century ago. It makes one wonder, if this single artifact survived by chance, how many others never will? How much knowledge has been lost, not to deliberate destruction, but to simple time, lying in shipwrecks, crumbling in ruins, or buried under the shifting earth? The mechanism is a reminder, not just of what the ancients achieved, but of how fragile history can be. A reminder that progress is not guaranteed, that brilliance can vanish, and that sometimes the greatest mysteries are not those we invent, but those we almost forgot. And yet, there is something else, something deeper, that lingers each time we gaze upon its corroded gears. The sense that this is not only a machine of the past, but a message. A voice calling across centuries, asking us to look again at the story of humanity and to admit that perhaps we do not know it as well as we think. By now, the Antikythera Mechanism has been reconstructed in laboratories, displayed in museums, and dissected in countless studies. We can see its dials, understand its purpose, even turn modern replicas and watch the heavens unfold just as the ancients once did. And yet, for all that, the mystery has only grown, because the device refuses to fit neatly into history. It is too sharp, too advanced, too far ahead of its time. It's not just the gears that puzzle scholars, it's the silence around them. Human invention usually leaves a trail. Experiments, failures, improvements. Think of the wheel, the arch, or the clock. They emerge step by step, scattered across centuries, each version a little more refined than the last. But here, there is nothing. The Antikythera Mechanism stands alone, like a stone tower in the desert with no roads leading to it. How can one explain such isolation? Some believe that the answer lies not in what the device is, but in what it represents. A glimpse into a hidden current of history. Perhaps knowledge has risen and fallen in waves, civilizations reaching heights before slipping into collapse, their achievements swallowed by time. Perhaps the Greeks inherited ideas older than themselves, fragments of wisdom carried forward from cultures now forgotten. The mechanism may be a relic not of a beginning, but of an ending, the last echo of a tradition already fading. Others see it differently. To them, the mechanism is proof of how fragile knowledge can be. The great library of Alexandria, destroyed by fire and neglect, is said to have contained thousands of scrolls, lost forever. How many designs, how many discoveries vanished in those flames? Could the Antikythera Mechanism be one survivor of a knowledge stream that was otherwise erased, its brothers and sisters turned to ash? If that library had endured, would our understanding of the world have leapt forward by centuries? Would humanity have entered the age of machines long before the Renaissance? And then there are those who let their imaginations drift further still. To them, the mechanism is not just a machine, but a symbol, evidence that history may not be as linear as we like to believe. What if there were once civilizations whose brilliance rivaled our own, whose inventions pushed boundaries we still struggle to comprehend? What if the Antikythera mechanism is not an outlier, but a survivor, a shard of a deeper past, carried forward by chance, disguised as Greek, but in truth far older? Of course, scholars caution against such speculation. They point to Rhodes, to Alexandria, to Archimedes and Hipparchus, to the flowering of Greek astronomy. They argue that genius sometimes appears in bursts, and that the mechanism is proof of just such a burst, a moment when mathematics, engineering, and craftsmanship aligned to produce something extraordinary. And yet, even those cautious voices cannot escape the unease. If such brilliance was possible, why did it not continue? Why was it buried, lost, remembered only by fragments? Standing before the mechanism today, encased in glass in the museum at Athens, one cannot help but feel its presence. The corroded gears are silent, broken, but they seem to hold a question within them, a question that lingers like a whisper in the back of the mind. What else have we forgotten? Because if a device like this could vanish for 2,000 years, re-emerging only by chance, then what else lies hidden beneath the waves, beneath the soil, beneath the ruins of civilizations we no longer even know existed? What stories of human genius, of discovery, of wonder remain locked away, waiting for us to stumble upon them? The Antikythera mechanism is a machine, yes, but it is also a mirror that reflects not just the brilliance of its makers, but the gaps in our own knowledge. It shows us what we once were capable of and reminds us of how fragile that capability can be. Knowledge, after all, is not eternal. It can be lost, like a shipwreck at the bottom of the sea, waiting centuries for someone to find it again. And perhaps that is the true mystery of the Antikythera mechanism. Not how it worked or who built it, but what it means. A silent message from the past, urging us to remember that our story is not complete, and that sometimes the most important discoveries are not those we create, but those we rediscover. And as you stand before it, the thought cannot help but arise. If this is what survived by chance, what wonders might have vanished forever? The Antikythera mechanism is more than a relic. It is a riddle carved in bronze, a riddle that refuses to give us a simple answer. For over a century, scholars have turned it over in their hands, built replicas, run simulations, and still it resists being placed neatly into the timeline of history. We can measure the teeth of its gears. We can trace the movement of its dials. We can even reconstruct its purpose. But we cannot explain its silence, nor the vast emptiness of evidence surrounding it. Perhaps that is why it lingers in our imagination. Because the mechanism does not only show us what the ancients achieved, but also what humanity lost. Its gears are not just fragments of metal. They are fragments of memory. They remind us that history is not a steady march forward, but a fragile path, one that can falter, break, and forget. Think about the accident that led to its discovery. A storm at sea, sponge divers stumbling upon a wreck, a chest of corroded fragments pulled from the deep. Had the waves shifted differently, had the divers searched another site, the mechanism might still lie buried, invisible, its story untold. How many other treasures remain out there, waiting, unseen, their secrets hidden by water, sand, or stone? How many questions about our past lie unanswered, simply because fate has not allowed us to find them yet? In the end, the Antikythera mechanism forces us to look both backward and forward. Backward, to recognize the brilliance of those who came before us, and to accept that we do not yet understand the full scope of their knowledge. Forward, to remind ourselves that what we know today may also one day vanish, unless we guard it, preserve it, and pass it on. And so, as we stand before this quiet machine, its gears locked, its hands forever frozen, we are left with a haunting truth. History is not complete. Our story is filled with gaps, silences, mysteries waiting to be uncovered. The Antikythera mechanism is one such mystery, pulled back from oblivion, whispering of what once was and what may never be known again. Perhaps that is its greatest gift, not the calculations it once made, but the questions it continues to ask. Questions that turn within us like its ancient gears, reminding us that the past is not fixed, not finished, not closed. Somewhere, out there, more fragments of forgotten genius lie hidden. The only question that remains is whether we will find them, or whether they, like so many others, will be lost to time forever.